as a part of a Kroger Fresh Take. Let's go around the doghouse. And as I told you before, there's a phrase that I learned growing up in school about the Monroe Doctrine. Maybe I know what that is. If you really put me to the test, I might be able to tell you. But the point is, I know the phrase exists. So whether I know what the Monroe Doctrine is or not, I feel like we have a pretty well-established Kirby Doctrine right now. The way in which Kirby Smart wants to run Georgia football and the formula for success that helps explain in part why Georgia won the most recent national championship. And I think the Kirby Doctrine, as I understand it, allows Georgia to draw a pretty sharp contrast with some of its would-be national contenders. Here is what I believe the Kirby Doctrine is. I believe Kirby Smart wants very talented players, and he wants to make them tougher and make them better. That is what I believe the Kirby Doctrine is. Talented players, make them tougher. Talented players, develop them and make them better. That is the Kirby Smart Doctrine. And in contrast to some other national championship contenders, I think that it helps explain maybe why Georgia emerged last season and maybe what keeps it in the conversation for this upcoming season there as well. Because here's the thing about the Kirby Doctrine as I see it. You can't have one without the other. You can't have, hey, we're going to get tough guys. We're going to get hardworking guys. We're going to build our team around that. Well, if they're not talented, you're out of luck. Or we're going to get superstar talented guys. And listen, we're going to bring in, as we talked about yesterday, the idea of a finished product. We're going to bring in a bunch of finished products. We're going to bring in a bunch of superstar talented guys. And if we got enough of that talent, then everything else is going to take care of itself. Well, not always. That's not always the case. That you got to have talented players. That's the requisite for competing. But you got to find a way to make those talented players a little tougher, make those talented players a little better. You got to find a way to do a value add. And if you can do that, then you have a chance to truly compete, or in 2021, as Georgia did, win the national championship. Let me give you a couple of counterexamples here for a moment. Let's listen to Nick Saban here. This is Nick Saban on the arrival of Jermaine Burton as a transfer wide receiver to the program. And listen, we like Jermaine to the extent that his interests don't conflict with Georgia's. We kind of wish Jermaine well. Obviously, he's a protege of Terrence Edwards. We love Terrence, so I don't have a bad word to say about Jermaine Burton. But when Nick Saban talked about Jermaine Burton transferring to Alabama, I think that Saban gave you a little bit of a window into what the Saban Doctrine is right now. A little different than the Kirby Doctrine. I think the Saban Doctrine a little different. And when Saban talked about the arrival of Jermaine Burton, I think he gave you a little bit of a window into what the Saban Doctrine is right now. This was Saban from a few weeks ago.
Jermaine Burton was somebody that we recruited out of high school that we thought was a really, really good player. He had a fairly productive, year at Georgia. They have a lot of good players at his position, and he had some production this year, but probably might have seen a better opportunity because we're a little bit more wide open and throw the ball more with a good quarterback. That may have been his intention, but we feel like we lost both starting receivers in Slade, two to the draft and Slade. So to get a more experienced player that has some playing time in this league probably is a good thing for us, and we like his ability, and hopefully he'll be able to be very productive for us.
Yeah, once again, around here we have nothing bad to say about Jermaine Burton, but I do think the Saban quote there is pretty indicative of what the Saban Doctrine is right now. Hey, come here and get stats. We're going to be productive. You can come here. We have a good quarterback. We're going to throw the ball. We're going to make you a superstar. It's basically leaning into your talent alone matters. You're kind of a finished product. And that's all kind of fine and well if you're Jamison Williams. You transfer in. You have a great season the way that he did coming in from Ohio State. But what if you're Jai Hall? What if you're told all these things of, hey, your talent alone is all that really matters. Come here, you'll be a superstar, you'll get stats, you'll get glory. And then when that doesn't happen, guess what? You become kind of disgruntled pretty fast. It almost seems like late in Saban's career, as he leans more in the direction of talent as opposed to hard work, that the kinds of players that he's attracting the program, such as Hall, are the kinds of players that Saban himself kind of becomes a little dissatisfied in. When you are selling glory, when you're selling fame, when you were selling stats and productivity, when guys don't get that, they're going to feel like they were kind of sold on a bill of goods. They're going to sold on a raw deal. So once again, if we establish the Kirby Doctrine is very good players who are going to be asked to work hard, make themselves tougher, make themselves better. It almost seems like the Saban part of this leans more in the direction of, hey, let's bring in talented players and let's figure it out after that. Whereas there's kind of a way to be on the other side of that too. We gave you the Dabo Swinney quote yesterday. I'll give this to you again. If Saban is guilty of kind of leaning more in the direction of, hey, bring in talented players and we'll make them into superstars. We won't ask quite as much of them as they're asking from these guys at Georgia right now. It's almost like Dabo is like veering way too much in the other direction here a little bit. The quote from him when he was asked about the transfer portal, we read this yesterday, was, my transfer portal is right there in that locker room, because if I'm constantly going out every year and adding guys from the transfer portal, I'm telling all those guys in that locker room that I don't believe in them. We're also not doing our jobs and coaches, recruiters for bringing in a bunch of transfers. So it's almost like Dabo's like, hey, I'm not worried about talent. I'm not worried about, I just want guys that work in my system. I just want guys that fit in well in this locker room. And, if you're willing to come here and be a hard worker, we're going to make you into a good player. We just want guys that fit in well here at Clemson. It's almost like Dabo is disregarding the level of talent required to compete the highest level. Dabo's not as aggressive as the recruiters other coaches are. Dabo's not as willing to embrace the transfer portal, certainly as a guy like Nick Saban is, or even as much as a guy like Kirby Smart has been. It's almost like Dabo is disregarding the talent part of the equation that I described a moment ago for Kirby Smart, whereas a guy like Nick Saban is maybe disregarding the way in which you have to ask something from the talented players in your program. Ask them to buy in, make themselves better. You can't necessarily always treat them like they are finished products. So ultimately, that's kind of where I see things for Kirby Smart. And listen, there's no guarantee this always works. Not every talented player is going to want to buy into what you're asking from them. And in some cases, your ability to get the most out of these talented players, maybe that's going to be at times maybe a little bit lacking there as well. But when you look at why Georgia won a national championship last year, when you look at what could make Georgia a national championship contender in the future, that to me is the Kirby doctrine. Bring in very talented players, a lot of very high 4- and 5-star rated recruits. Ask them to get tougher. Ask them to get better. Push them in that regard. Help train them in that regard. Both sides of that coin, to me, is the recipe for success for Georgia football, and important to keep in mind as we get ready for the start of an upcoming season again here this year.